What's up, history peeps? Today we're going to go over Black history from 1783 with the formation of the United States post Treaty of Paris that ended the American Revolution, all the way to regional tensions and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And there's lots of vital information here, so we're going to give you the snippets and pieces of what you need to know to be successful regarding Black history from this time. The first piece that we have up on the board up here is post-AMREV life for blacks. What is life like for them? If you were a slave during the American Revolution, some people cite it with the British, and in that case they largely were sent to Canada, and then sometimes they were sent to Sierra Leone or different colonies because they couldn't stay in the United States. It was dangerous for them. For some slaves that served under the Americans, they got their freedom. Sometimes they were promised freedom, and that didn't actually happen. There is an interesting case about a lady named Mum Bet. And Mum Bet is from the state, what eventually becomes the state at the time, a colony of Massachusetts. And she sues for her freedom because the Constitution of Massachusetts during the American Revolution looks very similar to the Declaration of Independence. And she says that if all men have a right to equality, then how come I am still a slave? And she sues for her freedom, and guess what? She wins. And the significance of this is that in the not too distant future following the American Revolution, states in New England start to free their slaves, or start the process of freeing slaves in the next couple of decades. So you can already see in the aftermath of the American Revolution, the North is starting to become different, with slavery not really playing a role, when that is not the case in the South. So the court case that she's famous for is Brom versus and Bet versus Ashley, the name of her former owners. The next thing is Richard Allen. Richard Allen is a slave, and what's happening during America during this time is it's the start of the Second Great Awakening, that coming back to religion in order to make yourself better and make society better. Well, what happens is that Richard Allen is a slave in Delaware, and he hears these preachers walking by talking about how slave owners are going to hell, and he invites the ministers to come talk to his master, knowing full well that after his master hears this, he's going to be compelled to free his slaves. And sure enough, that's what happened. And then what happens is that Richard Allen is going to become a minister, and he's going to go to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And he is going to be, at first the churches are somewhat equal, but then at one point in time there becomes the white part of the church and the black part of the church. You usually don't think of segregation in churches, but it was happening, baby. And so what happens is that he and some of his other ministers and people serving with him, they go into the church knowing full well that they're not supposed to go to the front. There's a sign saying whites only, and the ministers tell Richard Allen and some of his other ministers and friends, you've got to get out of here, you've got to go. So they kneel down and prayer, and then they walk away. Now the significance of this, so what, who cares, not a big deal. The significance piece is that he forms and helps form the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And this church is central to the civil rights struggle. Rosa Parks is from this. Many influential people are going to be part of the AME Church. So what you have from the beginning, when we get to the civil rights movement, you have the church and you have the tactic interlocked as a form of destroying white resistance. In other news, America is going to expand. So just to move things along here, in the aftermath of the American Revolution, it's the Articles of the Confederation. Articles of Confederation. And basically what happens is that in the Northwest Territory, present-day Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, slavery is outlawed. But it doesn't say anything about west of the Mississippi River, and in due time, when we get over here to the Louisiana Purchase, that is going to play a very prominent role in the divisiveness of the nation. So it seems like America is going to live up to its ideals. Slavery is very unprofitable during this time, and so slavery seems like it's going to die a natural death, because the founders knew that it was very hypocritical to say all men are created equal, and we the people, when people are held in bondage. All right, moving on to the Constitutional Convention. The Great Compromise does a compromise over slavery. In a sense, because what happens is the Virginia plan creates representation based on population. The New Jersey plan has equal representation, And the South says, well, we want to use our people in the South, our slaves, as representation. And the North says, no. But eventually there's a compromise that's reached with the 3/5 compromise, saying that for tax purposes and representational purposes only, slaves will count as 3/5 of a human being. Now, slaves don't get to vote, they don't get any rights, but it counts for more representation in Congress because the North has all the population, so they're going to control the House of Representatives. The South needs something, and so they're trying to get as much power in the House of Representatives as they possibly can. All right, in 1808, the Constitution actually says that the slave trade and importation of slaves will come to an end. All right, then Eli Whitney creates the cotton gin. Now he's trying to make life easier for slaves, but what happens is that he makes slavery more profitable. The Second Great Awakening, as alluded to, it's happening in the burnt-over district of New York. People are feeling the spirit right along the Erie Canal. And basically the main takeaway message from this is make yourself better and make society better by becoming part of religion. Whatever religion you find yourself being a part of, be a part of that to make yourself better, make society better. And you start seeing all kinds of reform movements start popping up, from abolition to temperance to mandatory compulsory education. But the big one we're going to look at is definitely abolition. Okay, rising abolitionism. We have all kinds of famous abolitionists: Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, William Lloyd Garrison, who creates the Liberator. So it's happening in the 1830s into the 1840s and 1850s, even before the Civil War. Right? What happens in Haiti is the ideals of the American Revolution inspire the French Revolution. The ideals of the French Revolution inspire the Haitian Revolution. And so what's going to happen in Haiti is that Toussaint Louverture is going to fight and win the first ever black republic. And so that fear of slavery expanding, slaves actually winning, is definitely manifesting itself in the Haitian Revolution, which leads to the Fugitive Slave Act, sometimes called the Annals of Congress, annals simply meaning the records of Congress. And basically what it says is that slaves can be tracked down and they can be returned. That is going to later on be weakened under Prigg versus Pennsylvania. Next issue on the board here, Gabriel's Rebellion. Gabriel is a Virginia slave, and basically he's going to plot to surround with 3 separate slave armies the capital of Richmond and hold James Monroe, who would become president, but at this time he's governor, hostage. He's all set to go, except what happens? Thunder, lightning, one of the worst storms that has happened in Virginia. And so the slave rebellion is put down. Some people are away from their plantation. Their masters ask where they've been, and somebody snitches. And what happens is that ultimately this rebellion, it was so close to actually happening that it would have probably worked, but it doesn't through the will of God or just natural things happening. Bad luck for Gabriel, I'll tell you that much. All right, then what we have is the Louisiana Purchase. The Haitian Revolution leads to the Louisiana Purchase, and so the United States doubles in size, but when it doubles in size, the issue of slavery also doubles too. And so is it going to be free? Is it going to be slave? That is the great debate on the table, because slavery is a very profitable enterprise to be a part of. Moving on, the Missouri Compromise. Henry Clay, the great compromiser, creates it. And basically what it says is Missouri enters as a slave state, Maine enters as a free state, and everything above the Mason-Dixon line is going to be free, and everything below is going to be slave. So it seems like the issue of slavery is settled for now. As you know, that is going to change when you get to regional tensions and then the Civil War. The War of 1812, essentially what you need to know is the Battle of New Orleans. Pirates are fighting there. Blacks are fighting there, both free and black. Andrew Jackson becomes a hero. And blacks are fighting for equality and getting promised freedom when in fact in many cases that it just doesn't happen. In terms of slave rebellions, we have another one, Denmark Vesey. Basically what happens is that he is going to be a slave that works on a slave ship, and at first he's in Haiti as a slave, but then he fakes epilepsy, we believe, and then enters life as working on a slave ship, and then later on buys his freedom. But he is going to plot to have a massive slave rebellion in South Carolina, in Charleston. But ultimately what's going to happen is word breaks out, and it's another near miss for slave rebellions happening. And then the issue of Liberia happens. What do you do with blacks when they're free? Because when they're free, they start, even if they're free, they start doing things like this with rebellions. And so the idea is send them to Liberia. Now, blacks also sponsor this immigration with an E, but as did many American Colonization Society friends. And so why is this important? Because this idea of going back to Africa, going back to the motherland, is going to be an idea that pops up time and time again in the civil rights struggle. It is going to be the basis in the 1920s for people like Marcus Garvey, who is going to inspire people like Malcolm X's father. So this idea of two separate Americas, white America, black America, or just black migration back to the motherland, it's an idea that's going to pop up time and time again. All right, and so we've had a lot of near misses with the slave rebellions, and now we're actually going to get something that actually manifests itself. Nat Turner is a slave from Virginia, and in the end of the day, he goes around killing, with his slaves that he is freeing, about approximately 60 people with knives and hatchets, and it's very, very bloody, and it is paranoia about what happens with slavery. And so it's very, very brutal. They even kill a baby in the cradle at one point in time. But you've got to understand that rebellions are built off of getting rid of resistance. And so there's no guns, because guns are very loud. And so they resort to axes and hatchets. Eventually, Nat Turner is going to be rounded up, he's going to be executed, and he's going to be skinned alive and kept as a souvenir that even to this day, some people have in their family skeletal remains or skin remains of Nat Turner. So what happens is that right after that, Nat Turner, supposedly his rebellion was started by the Tappan Brothers, or the Nat Turner rebellion inspired the Tappan Brothers. What's happening is that in Charleston, the Tappan Brothers, rich philanthropists who are also involved in the abolitionist cause, what they are doing is they are essentially passing out flyers. And Andrew Jackson says that stuff cannot be published because it could lead to tensions. What has happened in the United States is that there's already been a debate, an argument, a near civil war over the issue of taxes and import duties, and slavery is at the center of that. And so freedom of speech, kiss it goodbye, because we're going to limit that, because with the issue of free speech comes the issue of slavery and divisiveness. In Congress, there's this thing called the gag rule, and John Quincy Adams, whose mother spoke out against slavery, as did his father to some extent, he is going to say, am I not gagged? Can I not talk about this in Congress? Because the very mention of bringing up slavery in Congress was canceled. You could not do it. It was tabled. And so he says, freedom of speech, how come I can't say what's on my mind? All right. In other news, we have the Lovejoy incident. Elijah P. Lovejoy is a white publisher who lived in Missouri and was run out of town for publishing an abolitionist newspaper. He moves to Alton, Illinois, starts the Alton Observer, another newspaper. This time he is threatened and then killed. And so the significance piece is the first white person killed for a black cause, and that inspires people like John Brown, because there are memorial services all throughout the United States. And John Brown says, I testify before God and Almighty, everyone else, that I dedicate my life to the consecration of the eradication of slavery. Paraphrasing there, but essentially is what he's saying. In the presence of Almighty God, I will strike down slavery. And he will, at least attempt to. In other news, there is the U.S. schooner versus Amistad. If you've ever seen the movie Amistad, it's fairly accurate. What happens is a slave ship, a Spanish slave ship, has taken slaves illegally from Sierra Leone, an English colony, and transported them to Cuba and surrounding islands. Well, what happens is the slaves overthrow the captain and the cook, and then they tell the rest of the crew to take them back to Sierra Leone. Well, the crew doesn't take them back to Sierra Leone. They actually take them off the coast of New York. And so the Americans find this ship, and so the big idea is, who do these people belong to? Do they belong to England? Do they belong to Spain? Are they now the property of the United States, considering we found them, but we can't import slaves anymore? And so it's one of the biggest cases of the 1800s. And basically what happens is that the slaves are going to get their freedom, and a lot of abolitionist societies are going to give them their freedom by taking them out of the United States, for the most part. All right, moving right along here, we're almost there. Prigg versus Pennsylvania. Margaret Morgan is a slave who technically gets her freedom in Maryland, but her owner never signs the paperwork. And so what happens is she moves to Pennsylvania, and then she is going to be tracked down by a bounty hunter named Edward Prigg, because when her former master died, the rest of the family wanted her back. And so what happens is that she's rounded up, and we never hear from her again. She's sold into slavery, probably in the South. They probably just changed her name. But what we do know is that the Supreme Court, under Joseph Story, says, yes, the Fugitive Slave Act is legal, but you cannot make the states enforce it at all. You just can't do that, okay? And I believe that I kind of messed up the states here. So she moved from Maryland into Pennsylvania. So I think I might have messed it up earlier. Now we move on to Texas. Texas, it used to be with the Missouri Compromise, you had one slave state, you had one free, you had one slave, you had one free. Well, the issue of Texas, Texas became a republic in the 1830s, and Andrew Jackson doesn't want to touch that issue. Martin Van Buren has the Panic of 1837. He doesn't want to touch that issue because it's a very sensitive, involving slavery, and it could trigger a major event that could lead to some sort of civil war. Well, John Tyler, a guy who's a Whig, after William Henry Harrison dies and then gets kicked out of his own party, he wants to kind of be remembered for something, so he really sets things in motion for Texas to be annexed. And when Texas goes in, there's a bit of a problem over boundaries, and that leads to the Mexican-American War. And so what happens is that at the end of the Mexican-American War, the United States gets a bunch of territory. However, we have the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ultimately we get all this territory. But the future of, is the United States going to have that territory be free or slave, is ultimately going to lead to a series of events leading to the United States, I should say, Civil War. So there you have it in a nutshell, all the major events that you have for Black history from 1783 to 1848. Study those notes. The key thing here is look at the significance. Look at the story, yes, but look at the significance. Why do these things matter? Because they all have long-lasting implications that greatly change things. Have a good day, and may the Force be with you.